One. I'm Derek Zoolander, and this is Blue Steel Productions. Hello. It's June 4th, 1987, and this is another edition of Alone at Samahita, the award-winning talk show brought to you from our own tropical island, Koh Samui. My name is Hansel.
Hansel? He's so hot right now.
He is. Now, I have two special guests that I've been waiting to interview for a long time. You know them because they're in the public press a lot. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. I've loved Meghan since Suits. But that strange woman who just came in the picture has informed me that my special guests are not here. Instead, I believe I have two yoga people, which means our show today will be exceptionally boring because it's all about yoga. So, hand me the first question, please. This one is for Richard. How do I know that? Because it says Richard. Richard, what you're watching on Netflix right now? But before we go there, we're going to take a brief commercial break from our sponsors. What do you mean, we don't have any sponsors? I mean, nobody's paying me to do this? There's nobody? There's nothing? There's no sponsors? Okay, I'm out of here. So, how's it going, Richard? Oh, we just touched that out. I'm wonderful Mary.
He's so hot right now.
Oh, I just bumped into Hansel outside. Super hot. And Zoolander, I'm so happy to be part of Blue Steel Productions. Anyway, this is Mary Taylor Moore. And a lot of people do not know this man's middle name. Richard the Freeman. So, yeah, it is the. So, I heard Hansel was just asking you about Netflix. What's the latest?
Oh, well, we just finished Unorthodox.
Love it. I hope you guys have been watching that. Classic. Well, actually, that brings me to a good question, right? The juxtaposition, or the line where humor and really getting serious, following rules, and the orthodoxy to heterodoxy of original practice, and then where humor comes in, like to me the glue is humor. But what do you think of that? And then we'll see if anybody else has questions out there. I hope this microphone is working. Here.
Oh. Yeah. Unorthodox was just like,
It was so sad.
because I could see in myself that I fluctuate between one orthodoxy and then another orthodoxy, which doesn't make any sense, because how many orthodoxies? That would be a heterodoxy.
Mm-hmm.
But, so there are an endless number of orthodoxies, but they're all unhappy. And then, because they're all afraid. And what I think humor does is when the two meet and you can't decide which one to do, you go, ha! And that's yoga right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I told you we'd be talking about yoga. It's not boring though.
And to quote a great yogi, Yogi Bear.
Computer questions. Yogi Bear, yeah?
Yeah, Yogi Bear. The question was, if you find a fork in the road, take it.
Exactly.
So that's been eating me up.
Questions? We actually do have a sponsor today. Can you hand me that, please? The Samahita cookbook is sponsoring this episode of Alone at Samahita. Okay, one body without money sponsors another body without. Anyway, the reason why I'm bringing it up here is because now it's on Amazon and you can digitally download it, right, for a tiny little personal sum, and get at all these recipes, which at the moment Mary has been busy working on in her own kitchen, coming up with some great creations that will feature on the new, if we ever open, yes we will, Samahita buffet. So, how's that going, Mary?
It's good. We're working on it. We're trying to keep the sense of humor going with the food as well. And because if you don't have a sense of humor about things in life, I think you're right. You are really lost if you take the diet too seriously, and it's finding the balance between being too orthodox about the diet and too lax about it, where you find real joy. So that's what we're hoping when the buffet opens and you're not alone anymore. Yeah, that we'll find that balance.
Yeah, so over 20 years ago, I came across Richard the Freeman, and back in the mid-90s, when they only had video cassettes of yoga practice, and on one or two of them was the Freeman, and I don't know if any of you have seen this one, but he had chopsticks in them, right? Remember that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, but he wasn't eating with the chopsticks, instead he was pointing out to the lower abdomen with the chopsticks, and to show how the breath can be managed and controlled. But it was from that time on that I got enamored and very interested, because it was a combination of, yes it was, intelligence and humor. And really humor is, humor done well is intelligence. And so that spoke to me about what this yoga path is, okay? But yes, we can have a search inside, look inside, but in the words of John Lennon, too many people are taking themselves too seriously, and I've seen a lot of that, let's say in the yoga world, etc., where it brings us back to the orthodoxy, which you eventually have to escape from and make your own Netflix show about, right? So, when it came down to it, Richard, and your own practice, what was that line between the balance, and maybe it's the midline you're talking about, between taking it serious, the approach to practice, that dedication, and then the ability to be light, joke, play, is this real, is this serious?
Mm-hmm.
Where would you place that line?
Well, the first place is when you, if you're really serious, then you get grumpy. And particularly with people who are different than you, which turns out to be everybody. And even within yourself, you have different views. So one you can be grumpy with a different you. And it's just not fun to always be at war. And sometimes it becomes literally war between different cults and different beliefs. But, just like a sense of fighting. And I think long ago, I just saw that was not fun. And so then to try to see something from someone else's point of view, or to appreciate what they're doing, and that they're using words differently than you, the way they say their mantra might be slightly different. And this turns out to be a classic problem that's recognized in many of the different traditions of yoga, is that within any tradition, it breaks into many different groups with almost each practitioner. And then they, feel bad about each other, and eventually, hopefully soon, they start to communicate. And then when they finally communicate, it's such a relief to learn that. So, and I've tried different orthodoxies, and then fortunately when I was young I was able to travel a bit, and I would take my yoga orthodoxy into a different country, and there I would meet different orthodoxies of very different religious traditions, and then I would watch people chanting their chants, and they were smiling just like like the people in my cult were smiling. And I went, wait a minute, that doesn't mean that. And it started to open me up. I'm still working on it. I'm a very slow practitioner, and so I'm hoping any lifetime now to actually begin the yoga practice. I've heard good things about it.
Mary, how do you feel yoga practice has impacted your life so far, and in working, handling a family, being a mother, being a wife to the Freeman, and so on, and how yoga practice still at this stage and looking great is prominent in your life? How do you feel? What role has that played? Has it been on the side, something you would do, or do you feel it's sort of been a central dial to impact and manage these other aspects?
Well, you set that one up well. And I think for me, at this stage, it is my life, and life unfolds around it. But it doesn't start that way, and it didn't start that way. And as you were talking, I was thinking of humor and of how, even if you don't think you're orthodox, if you think you are doing something just right and no one else is, how the body gets rigid, how the mind gets rigid. And in the very first class I took with Richard, which was many, many, many years ago, and he was teaching in someone's living room, and there was a refrigerator that made noises in the background, and there were like 8 of us in the class, and someone had said, go to this guy's class, and I did. And there were some people there who, were sort of thinking this was this great teacher, and you had to live up to what he was doing, etc., and I just sort of wandered in off the street. And at one point in the class, he said, and this is what the breath sounds like. And he started to make the sound of the breath, and the phone rang. And so I said, oh, it sounds just like a telephone, out loud. And everyone in the room looked at me like, how dare you interrupt this? I sank into the background, but later found out that had not offended you too much. And it was from that point, as I realized that here was someone who was teaching something really good. I'd done a lot of other classes before that, and this was categorically different. But he wasn't taking it so seriously that I felt stupid for having said this in front of other people. And so I stuck with yoga, and with a form of yoga that would really start to let me tap into an essence of myself rather than impose something on myself. And so in answer to your question, I told that long story because that was the actual powerful teaching that day, was that what was important was that the yoga finds a way in to release you into who you really are. And then, of course, it's your life. If you go at it thinking, well, this is going to be my life, then you're imposing either it on your life or your life on your concept of what yoga is.
with that sense of humor, with the sense of ease that yoga can bring, then it informs, as you say, parenting and working and evolving and having the body age and having the body go through different phases that are good or bad or neutral. So it's my own.
That's it. We can sing that.
Yeah.
By the way, we are the only people at Samahita. We are individually alone here, and we're quite separated. I think the camera puts us in closer, but we're really far
That's an optical
apart.
illusion.
Yeah, very much an optical illusion. Each time I hear Richard breathe, I keep hearing telephone sounds. So thank you. You finally cleared that up for me. You know, I thought I had some funny ringing in my head every time I'm here. Is there a time where, like in your, obviously, as you said, one day you hope to start yoga soon, but before that, in the build-up to it, has there been a time of more interesting, rewarding practice? You know, what were those settings? Like you can look back and you can say, oh yeah, that was a great time.
Well, when I first was introduced to yoga in college, and I won't go into the details of that because it was in the 60s, that was quite inspirational, literally, and was quite inspired by a number of things, but one of them being the Tibetan tradition. It just seemed to speak to my experience at the time. And what other moments were found? And let's jump to the other end of the thing. I'm still young, although if you look at the calendar, I'm getting along. It was just a few years ago that, due to probably a genetic condition, my heart decided to just stop. Thanks.
Has it started since?
Well, that's always in question. It kind of starts and then it's not sure, whether this is the right place to be. But overall, it was, at the time, from my experience, it was just like going into a deep meditation. And then the people around me, like Mary and other friends, they had to deal with what they thought was a course, and I apologize for that. But I became very sensitive, and before that I would say probably I was not sensitive, in that I could huff and puff and practice for hours and hours and feel good, but still there was a lot of, like, look at me, look how humble I am. But just a little bit of yoga or a little bit of mindfulness practice, at the very beginning level, will just, knock you off your feet, so to speak, or put you on your feet. It's probably a better metaphor. You just drop your breath, and what we mean by that, you've got to find out. But you just drop your breath down, and there you are. So, confirmed by
Special dance. We're not alone, you see? There's something else here. So in a way, there's been the decades of experience keeping you young and looking good, but the I'm close. It's true, and this you could say unintended circumstance in a way has brought about a different experience and understanding. Yeah, and that gives you a sort of a different. And then right now you're here alone, maybe with Mary, but able to kind of dive into practice, but you find it at a greater depth. Would that be it? Greater experience, more sensitivity?
Yeah, almost to the point I think, man, I'm too sensitive. But it's also fortunate in that, I don't have to, if I'm looking at a text, if I read through half a page of it, I'm like, wow, this is just too cool,
Yeah.
rather than having to read through 2 or 3 chapters.
Yeah.
Or or any sequence of poses, just like small little bundles following the actual vinyasa principles, which are actually very internal. I was like, wow. And I think what I'm learning is just that the joy of not doing yoga, which is, and probably a lot of students go, like, it's just like if you're doing Urdhva Dhanurasana. Many times. And then you really do it and you breathe into it, and then when you come down, if you come down mindfully, and then when you finally get to the ground, you go, ah. You just let go of it, ah. And that's not doing it. And you can just use the mantra, it's so nice not to do yoga. But then the trick is, you have to do it to not do it. And that's in the fine print. Okay, that won't be in when you first join a class. I'll say, oh, read this, and just click, I accept at the bottom of this. And it's pages and pages in a very small font. And one of these is, in order to not do yoga, you have to do it.
It's in your cookies agreement, I think, right? But that actually brings us even back to what we started with here, that the orthodoxy is this maybe method way that can pull people in, bring people in, keep people sort of enslaved to an approach, an identity, a way. But really, when one starts to experience it, and it was said to me along the way that that starts to drop, even the doing of such and such a practice, how you're doing it has to drop, and you go more, it's the really internal response.
But
Which is
without the orthodoxy, in some ways, sometimes you can't
find a way in.
Start it. You
Yeah,
can't get started.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's almost like as humans, our nature is religion. Even if you're a secular humanist, that's a metaphysical thing. And so that's what defines humans, is we always create some kind of pattern of belief that has a metaphysical component, even if it's, an atheistic or a secular humanist or this or that. There are thousands of different ones, but all of them are, this kind of belief, and are actually held almost like a religion. And that's what we do as humans, and that's why we're so fighting all the time. It's like, if you read history, it's basically, just lists and lists of religious wars, or religion co-opted by politicians. And so their actual religion is their own ego power. So you could have the religion of, just take any, half the world leaders, and you put them. This is the religion of belief in ta-ta-ta-ta, or you know what I'm talking about. And there's no end to any one of those. So they just want to end up either seeing the loneliness of being the only one on top, sitting on top of an infinitely high throne, eating all other beings for breakfast, crunching their various planets between the teeth. Because that's where the ego just has no limit to it. And that's kind of sad. And then, but fortunately, if it's a tradition of teaching, a tradition of practice, it's rich, and it has many, many, many roots, and many, many, many beings, and many lifetimes contributing to the culture of the poetry that's actually being transmitted. And it's almost like all these elders, and sometimes young ones, sometimes from other, they're just reaching out to you and trying to go, hello. and sometimes, it'll be just in the form of like a little puppy or something comes up and jumps on you, or a kitten, or it can be humans. And that's what, like, and then you start to look at them without making them an object, without thinking, what can I get from them? But you start to appreciate. And that's the beginning that's the yoga. And so there's a nice thing, yoga like water flows between things. Water's really good at that. I don't know if you've been watching, just watch water or something, it's really cool. It loves flowing, and it always flows between things. Okay. So, real yoga flows between schools of yoga, and real religion flows between schools of religion. And it's always between people that, love flows. And so, take a lesson from water.
The interstitial space of yoga practice.
Yeah.
Okay? Mm-hmm. How it takes place in the body and then between bodies. And I guess it's that cultural richness, as opposed to maybe identifying just orthodox, cultural richness, which has, as you say, the depth of time and experience and intelligence, which I know is what appealed to me when I stepped into this. It wasn't like, I should follow that guy, typically the guy, and then all my problems are solved, but rather, and we know that's led to too many problems, so instead it's stepping in. This is what we hope it's offering, stepping in and tasting that richness and then being fed and nourished by it. And then whoever's in a teacher role is not trying to be your teacher, but is rather help and a guide that knows how to let you be and go on, so to speak. And then hopefully that's the healthy approach in the next episode of our unorthodox series here. And just like water, humor should flow through all these elements, all these pieces.
Yeah? I think currently some of the best teachers worldwide are comedians. And maybe you can what are your favorite comedians?
That's good, because I like to curse, and I'm very happy about that. It's honest. Okay, they keep beeping me out here, but anyway. So, very good. Anyway, we started with 6.5 million viewers. Now we have 7. And I think the 7 are sitting around here. But that's okay, 6 million people tune out, 7 stay in. There's a lot of people joining and saying hi, and then unjoining. No, they're not. Anyway, Eliza has a question. So I told you this was going to be about yoga, or it's what's between yoga. That's more interesting, yes. Are there any yoga practices that you feel are particularly helpful at a time when you are physically isolated from our teachers and yoga community? Well, see, physically isolated, not if you're water. You were flowing in between. And we're always in that position, even if we're sitting next to each other. But anyway, any thoughts on that? Yoga practices that you feel are particularly helpful at a time when you're physically isolated?
Well, I think one thing that happens when we're physically isolated is that we have this imaginary sense of confinement, and that and it is real in an embodied way when we are isolated, but that we then start to isolate ourselves out from other aspects of life. In other words, because we're in our own home, that's all we can do. And that feeling of isolation starts to spill over into everything. And so I think that in terms of practices, there's some very simple breathing practices, some chanting practices, and then the asana practice that get us embodied. But that a mind practice that's really important is to notice when you start thinking that yoga is a separate thing from your life. When my yoga's over here, so what yoga practice can I do to make my life better? Rather than to realize what is arising in your life is the yoga itself. It may be obstacles, it may be difficulties, but that's what the yoga is. And so how do you show up for being embodied and present and watching the wave pattern of the changes of those moments happen, which we do practicing sitting meditation or breathing practices where we're observing patterns of change. But how do you apply that to the everyday things you have going on in your own life and realize that's actually the yoga practice? I'm washing the dishes and I'm being present washing the dishes. I'm dealing with the kids and I'm being present dealing with the kids until I can't do that anymore, and then I step back and get grounded. So having the basic practices like getting grounded and embodied and learning to watch things as they arise, and then more importantly applying them to the day-to-day things and realizing yoga is not separate from the life.
It is water. Yoga is water.
It's a good question because when I came over here almost 20 years ago, and actually the one person I was talking to about coming over here before leaving was actually this man, Richard. And we had no idea what lay ahead, and here we all are. And interesting what happens in 20 years. Anyway, but I went from a vibrant New York City life where, of course, there was studios, there was people, there was what you might call a community, to just me and my partner then Jatima, and we were here. We were the first yoga thing to really sort of set up here, Thailand and around Asia. There was still no big studios in Hong Kong or the other places, and so then I would spend 4 to 6 months in India practicing, and even then you're kind of on your own. But the point is you have to figure it out up here. So what I am gladly, which is sort of why I was bringing up the question to you earlier about those memorable moments, I'm being reminded of these 16, 18, 20 years ago of really just being alone, up early, like very early in the morning, going in to practice, and from here I had to more or less teach myself. Now, of course, there are resources you go back to. I could call up the teacher, or I'd spend some time in a physical space of the teacher, but still you're kind of on your own. But what happened was real growth then occurred. Before that, it was a lot of input, it was fun, and sometimes it was actually confusing, and I wasn't making that much progress. But when left alone, but here's the key of one can be alone and sort of, I don't know what to do, should I practice? I'll try a bit of this. Your heart is only half in it, you kind of give it up, you do a bit, you think, that was enough. You haven't hit the joy yet, you don't know, should I be serious? Can I? No, I'm not serious, no, I'm too serious. So it's about, like what you're bringing up just with the dishes of, I am just in this. Okay, this is what I do. I get up. And like a comment you made earlier, Richard, it's not that I must follow this sequence or this line, but rather that, okay, I'm going to start soft and smooth. I'm going to embrace this. Right? And that's what I'm doing early morning, these isolated days. And I had to be isolated anyway, so thanks to the whole world for joining me while I'm isolated just to write my own thesis. But I find it as a beautiful time and opportunity that you don't rarely get So take this opportunity. It's not like, oh, you should do these 3 asanas or these 4 breaths, okay? That is not a formula for practice. And this time, what have you learned? What have you come across? What have you worked on? In what situation, with what teacher have you engaged in something? And now is the chance to actually take that. Instead of picking up 20 new things online, etc. But I have something that's with me that's been floundering, but here I am. And now you will really find the inner teacher, which is tied to intelligence, which is linked in with humor, of course. Okay, Buddhi humor, and that will start to, because it becomes very inwardly detailed, nuanced in a way, and you start to actually understand the nature, could be of a particular asana, of how the breath works in your own inner state to a much more fantastic degree than if you're left back in the group. So it's that dichotomy of have community, check in with good teachers, emphasize good teachers, and at particular times, but those other times is when, which is kind of like now, when you can really link this, right? When you can really tap into it. Okay? Anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Yeah, when you're basically isolated, if that's your situation, that's when it's just your mind, like there aren't, and if you project things out onto other people and you're always having imaginary conversations with other people, even though they're not even nearby, notice that. And it is one of the ways for the traditional yoga practice is that one would go off into isolation, perhaps to a very small shala or a little, or kutir, or a little hut, up in the jungle, and you would make sure it's clean but isolated, and then you would go through your practices, and you were basically by yourself. And a retreat like that could last, anywhere from 7 days, 10 days, to 3 years, to your whole life. And this is actually kind of considered the classical way. And, but now we end up in isolation, but there's also the internet. Are you isolated? And discover you're not actually isolated, even when you're in your little cottage in the forest. You're surrounded by at least bugs. Depending on what climate you're in, you're surrounded by lizards, monkeys, all kinds of insects, birds. And you start to say, wow.
I have one other thought on that. And one other thought on that is that we tend sometimes to hear something like, oh, well, it's make your life your practice or whatever. But it's really important to hear this aspect of it, which is that you have a practice of some sort that you do in a consistent manner. And it may not be a practice that lasts your whole life, but it is something that has caught your interest, like you were saying, that has resonated with you deeply. So it's not just that one day, well, I just do back bends today, or I just do some breathing today, that you really take the time to think about and to experience what is nourishing you about your practice, and to do that consistently. So that's how you really start to learn what the sort of intricacies of it are, rather than just sort of randomly taking whatever you might do this day and then doing something different the next day. And this is a great opportunity to go so deeply by disciplining yourself a little bit, like you were saying when you first got here, to get up and prioritize doing whatever it is you conceive your practice to be, and then reflecting on it.
and seeing how it has residue over the course of the day, and then doing it again the next day and seeing what the differences are and how you might need to shift it. So it's hard to say, oh, these 3 things for the whole world are going to work. It's something that's a very individual thing that we can take this time to find for ourselves.
Yeah, this is a great discussion, and it actually brings up another point that I was thinking I would raise in one of these talks. But because one can have a romantic idea, like you're describing, that, oh, I'll go off to, the Himalayas, I'll go off to the forests of Thailand, and of course, you've talked of many days of wandering and that, and I would always spend time on pilgrimage and go to ashrams, go to monasteries, and they're part of the development, part of growth. But what I do want to point out is that actually the moments, let me talk in personal experience here, moments of what I would call that sensitivity breakthrough, like a different shift, came in the regular home. Kids are out around practice time, and then something along throughout the day, as opposed to in some romantic idea. Because whenever I'd go off, especially to ashrams in India with a romantic idea, now it was interesting, they'd end up being crazy, noisy, all sorts of things going on, etc. You take it as part of your practice, okay, to overcome the loss of expectation and the frustration. But this only has currency if you can take it and it stays as part of you, like you were just talking about that, and then bring it. And then it's more likely that you become aware, washing the dishes and other stuff. And so it's that fine line of, I'm mindful all day, to, oh, hold on, I actually have learned something and there is something for me to do without it being dogmatically imposed. And again, it's that fine line of being relatively free, but also taking good advice from the rich culture of these teachings and so on, And so when I think then we are humble and we're just, okay, let me try to use my intelligence, see what's here, and then practice it, So if you asking the question about what to do at home, it's take a hold of something you already know and go deeper with it, penetrate, get in, and you'll have the breakthroughs at home in your space as opposed to if you were up in the forest jungle now, good. Where did Hansel go? Because it's so hot. It's so hot.
I can't stop thinking about it.
I'm going to go get him anyway, but I know we've got 1 or 2 more questions going on here. What? No. Derek Zoolander keeps trying to pipe in with his blue steel. Forget about it. Bring back Hansel. Thank you. Okay. There's all these serious questions here. Is the day... Hello, Mireia. Hello, Ireland. Is the day of the guru-disciple over? Well, that's a question. Not sure I ever fully subscribe to that approach anyways. My take is that we're evolving into a more democratic, collective approach. But there are pitfalls here too. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Just look at my eyes. Just obey everything I say. With Hansel.
Just memorize this answer and repeat it. I think the day of the exploitation of others through, I would say, power tripping, or the formulate yoga gone bad, where one gains some kind of skill in yoga and yet the deeper tendencies towards desire for power and money and adorate whatever it is takes over, and one forms not necessarily an abusive relationship, but one that is not, it's through, or what do they say, guru-disciple relationship. And so, traditionally one has many, many gurus. I was thinking of one person who had 25 gurus. And you might have a primary guru, which is just somebody that, that's your kind of you check in with. But then you have many instructional teachers. And the secondary, or the, what they call Siksha Guru, or the one that give you instruction, might be the one that really like opens your eyes. And oftentimes, it can be doesn't have to even be a human. You can meet them on the street. It could be a honeybee that comes and stings you on the nose. And so that's the actual relationship. And it's not an exploitive relationship. And so, but there still is relationship with someone who, so the word guru means heavy. That's the thing. So, as opposed to lagu, which means lightweight, like a little feather. And heavy is a natural thing. It's not like, oh, I'm heavy, and you want everybody to know how heavy you are. It's just the gravity of reality is the guru. And so it's always said that the guru is inside of you, manifesting in the very center of your central channel as the beloved, as other beings. And the place to find the guru is in the depth of your own heart, and therefore in the depth of the heart of all other beings is the actual teacher. And so that relationship, I think, needs to come into style.
And
this time in history, with the coronavirus going on, there is this awakening to the other that's happening all over the world. People are really beginning to see each other, and perhaps even some of those who are the self-proclaimed gurus are beginning to see, wait a minute, other people really do matter. So this is an opportune time in history for that dynamic to shift, and I think it's going to. I think that, seeing the other and realizing that we are all so dependent on one another that that's going to change things, and that this is an opportunity for that to happen.
Yeah, it's another good question, a good topic to get into. A lot of it is sort of subscribing to words and language that come out of particular points in time, of particular cultural nuances, right? So, Sanskrit teachings, texts, and, you only have to go back a few years and it's like, no, the guru listened to him usually, right? And of course, with transparency arising in the last few years, that's been highly disputed and questioned, and rightfully so. But the question is where do you put your effort and attention, and how discriminatory are you? Like myself as a young practitioner, I gave myself a task to go around all the major yoga schools and that. And some of them had big gurus, etc., but I was never really impressed because you could kind of see certain dogma or forcing, or just a shoddy charisma, and lots of sycophantic approaches. So when it was somebody, which is why I gravitated to someone like Richard, Twarji, people like that, were like, we're getting you to use your intelligence, do your thing, but here's something to practice and do. And so in that sense, I feel guru, teacher, guide is important. But if you go back in time, long time, and these early texts are really interesting and valid. And if they do speak of that relationship, they speak of it in a spiritual inquiry way, which doesn't exist much in the current yoga world. So if you really, first of all, Hatha Yoga is quite technical, okay? So you can't just attack that on your own. which people do, and then that's more egotistical than having a guru, so to speak. You can't just figure out how a mudra works or a particular other practice by picking up somebody's interpretation of the Hatha Pradipika, etc. But then spiritually, we know nothing, and we need to start there. And the question is, who do you talk to? Who can you listen to? And there are moments, like Richard said, the bee stinging you on your nose, and these are moments to wake up, etc. And then I think there's only a handful of good teachers around in that sense. And like you said, it's non-manipulative, non-coercive. It's almost like, I've taught you something, now go. Because spirituality is a deeper self-inquiry and looking in. And so I think we all need that help and support, but we all have to get on with it. And I know, like I started doing pranayama breath stuff with Tawari, and then I meet him again. If I hadn't gone and done the practice, then there'd be nothing for him to say to me the second time. Of course, if he was into owning people, and having a move, then don't practice and just listen to me, and I'll say whatever. And that's the tricky part. So you have to look at yourself and say, well, what am I doing here? Am I in something? And how can I discern and discriminate? And so I think that the time of, I should go and follow this person, that should transcend it, as based on your question, Maria. Okay, the Guru in Galway, right? But to ignore, drop, teacher, good advice, good teaching is also a calamity. So I think we're really being pushed to the point of wake up and mature, right? Do this yourself. Now you're in isolation. Get good advice from good teachers. Look into it. Try and understand it more. Pay more attention. And I think it's a process, cycle of that. Or just find Hansel, because he's your man. Listen, believe it or not, we've been 55 minutes, so we're just going to wrap up with one last question. I'm going to go out and find Hansel so we can close this show down. But Barbara here is asking about, is there what breath or practice would you do to strengthen the lungs? I'm going to go get Hansel.
I would say pranayama would strengthen the lungs. Basically, good breathing. Well, exhaling is very good. It's almost as good as inhaling. And if you exhale very well, it tends to activate what we call the mucus train, in which pollutants that enter your lungs come up in the form of spittle that you can then spit out. And
hey guys.
Yeah. Oh, Hansel.
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 Megan, you're looking great. I'm so glad you came on the show with me. Why'd you keep moving away from me? I'm so hot right now. Derek Zoolander, get out of here. What were you talking about? Breathing, yoga. It's not boring. Why do yoga? No. I'm Hansel. Let's have a dance off, Richard. You know what I mean? So, anything more?
No, subtle dancing.
If you want to strengthen your lungs, dance. Have fun. Stay humorous. Sing. There you go. Take a nice inhale and make it long on that exhale. This is Hansel signing out with my special guests, Harry and Megan. Thank you for your time and your wisdom on nothing. And it's all about nothing here. And we'll see you again for another episode of Samahita Cookbook. I think we're alone now. Oh my God, we're playing that song. Alone at Samahita. Goodbye.